Ashley Gray, welcome to the Morning Shot.
Thanks for having me on, Ryan.
Thank
It's a
you very
pleasure to
much for
be.
joining us from all the way from Sydney, Australia this morning, or I should say good afternoon because you're 14 hours ahead.
Yes,
Congratulations on your new book.
thank you, Ryan. It was a long labour. Um, it started really back in 2003, and I did over 200 interviews for it. So, yeah, it's very in depth and it was very labour intensive. But I think in the end, it does justice to both the players who went on the tours and also the cricket history as well. I think it allows everyone to get a lot closer to what actually happened back in those days in the 1980s of the rebel tours of apartheid South Africa.
You're talking about 17 years of work into this book, 200 interviews. Can you give us, in detail, how you went
Yeah.
about crafting this book?
Okay. Well, I'll just give you the uh, what was the original spur for the book, and that was when I met Richard Austin in Kingston, and he was begging on the streets there. This was in 2003, and I did a story with him. And at the time, he was not in good shape, and he was still quite entertaining. And he wanted me to contact Kerry Packer, the guy who started World Series Cricket, and he wanted me to get a job for him. He said they were good friends, which was kind of funny. And yeah, so he was a little bit under the influence of various drugs and alcohol. And what happened was that yeah, I wanted to know why he was in this condition because he was a Test cricketer. He had played World Series cricket. He had also been a great table tennis and football player as well. And I wanted to know, Ryan, why he was in this condition. And he told me it was all about South Africa and going to South Africa and the rebel tours. And from that moment on, I knew that there was a bigger story here that had to be told. And I think over the years, other people have tried to do it, but they've never actually spoken to all the players like I have. And they've never got to
That
the
must have
real.
been quite an experience to have spoken to those 20 rebel cricketers that journeyed to South Africa at one of humanity's most pivotal points, apartheid South Africa. That must have been chilling. I'm talking about it, and the pores in my skin is actually raising.
Yes, yes. A lot of these guys were badly affected by what happened afterwards, Ryan, because they were offered, on average, about $100,000 US to play in South Africa. And obviously, South Africa was a country which practiced apartheid, which meant that it discriminated against people of any colour. And these guys coming from West Indies came from impoverished circumstances, but the point was that they were also of the same colour as the people in South Africa who were being discriminated against. So there was a sense in which they were taking blood money in order to bolster their bank accounts. And of course, there was a massive backlash in the Caribbean. And if I can just read a quote from Trinidad Foreign Minister Basil Ince of the time, he said, "They are mercenaries fighting for the cause of apartheid on the backs and blood of black people of South Africa." So you can see that there was a lot of intense argument and debate about the merits of these guys going on tour. And yeah, it was difficult. It was a difficult situation for both the guys who went and also the people in the Caribbean. So yeah, and when they came back, they were banned for life from playing the game they loved. And a lot of the guys couldn't cope with that, and they suffered ostracism and were pushed aside. And even though they had lots of money, yeah, being social outcasts was difficult to deal with, and they ended up often in bad circumstances.
The story of this rebel tours is well known, Ashley. How
Yeah.
does the Unforgiven, tell it differently?
Well, I think what has happened before, Ryan, is that a lot of the stories that have come out about the rebels have taken into account all the political angles, which are very important. The question of principle versus profit. I mean, these are age-old themes, and but what they've neglected to do really was to talk to all the players, and because ultimately it's a human story. It's about the players and what happened to them and how they suffered. And yeah, I know there was a CNN documentary a few years ago, but they didn't even speak to Lawrence Rowe, the captain. So yeah, and I did. So I chased them all down. I was a one-man band, and it was hard work, but persistence pays off in the end, Ryan. And obviously, I didn't get to speak to Sylvester Clarke. He's the only guy I didn't get to speak to because he passed away in 1999. But I did speak to his wife and also his son, and obviously lots of his friends. But yeah, I think that's where this book is different in that it tells the story from the players' points of view. So yeah, that's how it adds to the canon of cricket literature, I think, in a way that hadn't previously been explored.
It's been 4 decades since these rebel tours took place,
Yeah.
Ashley. You know, in writing this book and publishing this book, you know,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on how it connects with 2020? There are so many humanitarian issues that are plaguing the world right now, not least the refugee crises.
Yeah, sure. Sure. I think that it connects now because these guys are still alive and in a lot of cases still suffering. I mean, David Murray, for example, the wicketkeeper from Barbados, he tells me that he still gets called a race traitor for having gone on the tours. You know, that they're living with the shame. So yeah, it's in their lives and it's happening right now. So there's a definite connection. And you know, you've got guys like Herbert Chang, you know, in Kingston, in Greenwich Town there, in the sort of ghetto area. And I mean, his life has kind of been destroyed by what happened in South Africa. You know, he even says that he didn't get paid for it, although you know, that's a debatable question. But yeah, his life fell apart after that. Although the good thing about Herbert is that you know, he can still recall what happened then, and you know, he's not crazy or whatever the reports have been. This was another thing, Ryan. I wanted to get to the bottom of what actually these players felt and what they were doing now, and because there've been so many reports in the media, you know, of sightings of them, of like they were sort of these rare animals, you know, that had sort of been put out to pasture somewhere and we weren't allowed to access them. So I've managed to go in and explore their humanity and find that they are actually alive and kicking and still feeling it. So I think that's the connection with 2020. And although it's not quite in the same league as all these crises you're talking about, it's nonetheless a very important issue that continues to
Did you get
provoke.
from them? Did you get from
Yep.
them any sort of regret if they had the chance to do it again, that they'll do it differently?
Sure. Some of them did. Some of them were quite proud, though, Ryan. Some of them said that by going to South Africa, there was a moral purpose there in that they would open the eyes of the white public there, the public that bolstered apartheid, and that they would be able to open their eyes to black people in a way that they hadn't before. They would be able to see that people of colour could play cricket and they could even play better than their own white side, which they did. They were the only side so far, the only West Indian side to go to South Africa and actually win a series. So yeah, it opened the eyes of the white constituency in South Africa. But as far as the so-called coloured people of South Africa goes, it was a different story. I mean, some did get along to the games, but not many. But most of them were into football, into soccer. So yeah, that their interest in cricket was kind of negligible. May I say that some of them, however, did regret it, and one in particular, Everton Mattis, who was the elegant stroke maker from Kingston in Jamaica. He ended up in New York, and as he will tell you today, if he was on your program, he escaped from Kingston because he thought his life was under threat, because he felt that the police were targeting him. He wasn't able to get a job, and he said this was all related to South Africa, and people would taunt him and say terrible things about him and imply that he was not a man of principle because he had been to South Africa. So he escaped to New York, but he ended up running with a drug gang and got into cocaine, and even got shot in the leg at one point. So, but now he's found God and he's okay. But he had massive regrets about it.
I just want to end by asking you, Ashley, what do you hope that your readers take out of this book?
Well, I hope that they enjoy the stories. They enjoy the humanity of their countrymen here. These 20 guys, they are able to show some forgiveness, perhaps to them, but also to understand that it was a complicated issue and that the arguments on both sides have incredible merit, and it's not an easy subject to deal with, but it's one that has to be spoken about, and these guys should be allowed to have their say, and that's what I've given them in this book. See, as a boy growing up in Australia, the West Indies were like our second team, because I calculated last night before I went to bed that West Indies and Australia between 75-6 and 84-85 played each other in 10 series. It's amazing. I mean, that they were here more than any other side, so we knew them very well. So we had a personal attachment to these guys, and this, for me, was important as an author to bring that through, because I felt that I owed it to them as well, because they'd been so much of a part of my childhood and so many Australian boys growing up, and we owed it to them to do them justice. And a lot of these guys were our heroes too. So yeah, that's what I'd like to think that,
Well, Ashley Gray, once again, congratulations on the publishing of your new book. Thank you very much for this interview. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate it as well. And
thank you very much. Ashley Gray, all the way from Sydney, Australia, talking to us this morning on The Morning Shot.